So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Robert Bradshaw, who is the president of WiserOwl. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is WiserOwl all about? Well, I don't know, but Robert's going to tell us at some point. But I can tell you that he is a contact center veteran, let's say, expert. And he's got some really, really interesting kind of views about measurements and analytics and how we might be measuring the wrong thing or costing out kind of things kind of in the wrong ways. But anyway, Robert's going to help us kind of like decipher all of that and drop some knowledge on you that will make you think twice or again about your existing contact center operation. So welcome to the podcast, Robert. How are you doing?
Adrian, thank you. And thank you for having me here today. I'm doing very well. Just things are very positive and very upbeat. And being here is just another good reason for me to be happy.
Excellent. Now, I know that we met on a CSG webinar a little while ago, and then we were talking subsequently. And I wonder if you can, if people are not familiar with WiserOwl or yourself, I wonder if you give me a bit of a thumbnail sketch or like a bit of a background on yourself and the work that you do before we can get cracking into some of the things that you mentioned to me when we have to talk about that sort of stuff.
Sure. I spent a career working in several industries and technology over about 30 years, and started off in Fortune 100, and then pivoted over to working in some startups.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the organizations I worked with was focused on contact centers, and specifically in procedural guidance, and that actually gave me an opportunity to work in contact centers that had maybe 30 agents, 50 agents, all the way up to 10,000 agents.
Okay.
And what came out of all of that experience was a general theme that the leadership, whenever it came down to having to make, decisions, and when those decisions involved money, one of the things that they had expressed as sort of this blue sky wish was, I really wish I could just have the actual dollars of this particular decision I'm trying to make here, so I know, what the savings are going to be or what it is I'm really dealing with, because at some point I'm going to have to tee this, up the ladder.
Okay.
And so that was really the inspiration for, where WiserOwl came from, and really what it is we do. And that is, what Jerry talked about. We measure the actual contact center costs, what work actually costs in a contact center. But we do that from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that by measuring activity by activity, contact by contact, instead of averaging a cost from the top down.
Right. I mean, I think that's really important because for the longest time, people, particularly in the service sort of space, but also in the broader experience space, have been, if you like, asked for the demonstrable kind of proof of the ROI that their initiatives are delivering. And I think what you're going to tell us a bit about is it gives us an insight in terms of how we could do that, based on the kind of how you go about it. So when you explained this to me, there was following the webinar that we did with the CSG, there was a whole bunch of things that you said, which I thought, that's super interesting, and I think people would really benefit from understanding some of those sort of things. And so, if I may, I'd like to just kind of go through a few of them, and so we can get you to unpick or unpack, choose your kind of adjective or your verb or whatever the word is, the things that you're saying. Now, the first one you said, which I thought was almost like the headline one, is you said contact centers measure activity with extraordinary precision, but they cost it with an average that erases all of that precision. And I was a bit like, okay, help me explain to me, what do you mean by that?
Sure. Every ACD in the world, they track talk time, hold time, wrap up time. They do it second by second. I mean, and for folks out there who know, there are ACDs out there that'll track it down to the thousandth of a second, right?
Right.
And so they have this hyper precision. So what that does is it equips managers and leaders with the knowledge of exactly what's happening in their operation on an activity perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they take the cost and they try to put a cost to all of that, they take all of that work they take all of the money that's spent on the work and then they divide it by total contacts
Right.
or some other total number. So you end up with all of this hyper precision on your activity represented by a single cost number.
Right.
And what we talk about is, or what I had mentioned to you before was, you measure your work from the ground up and you cost it from the top down.
Right.
And that's where I see as, that's a challenge.
Yeah, because like you say, you take the number of interactions and then your costs and you put it together and you get this kind of big, what you're saying is that it's almost a bit of a blancmange sort of number, which actually doesn't tell you what gives you an average. But as you say, if you've got tools that are measuring things with such precision, you're not necessarily looking at individual kind of calls and maybe different kind of intents or different types of kind of like fixes that you're doing and trying to understand kind of like where your costs are going across the landscape, and you're basically averaging it out, and so you don't see the spikes, as it were, or the differences. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, we talk about how does all this translate, into a day-to-day picture, and the idea is that today a single contact might touch an IVR, then a bot, then an agent, maybe a second agent. And every one of those costs something different. And a senior agent isn't a junior agent. A bot isn't an IVR.
Right.
And yet an average cost folds all of that into a single figure. And so what does that translate into financially? Well, what that means is a leader can tell you their total cost to the dollar and can't tell you what any single piece of work actually costs.
You're right.
What's the queue cost? What about that channel? What about all the off phone work? I read one industry study actually out of Europe that put the average contact center operation at about 4 different technologies. So there's a lot of complexity going on there, and yet it's all trying to be articulated to the business using a single number.
Which is, and if you don't get that clarity or that granularity, as it were, then when you proposed sort of improvements to the system around trying to improve efficiency, whether it might be to your IVR or your bot or agent handling or whatever it might be, if you're always using an average cost number, then you're going to struggle to prove that ROI, because you don't get that granularity. Is that fair?
It is, and we all know. I think everybody is fully aware that AI is pretty much the event, if you want to call it, the boardroom level event that's really turned the lights on to this whole costing issue. And when you talk about averages, an average cost made a lot of sense for contact centers and what they were built for.
Right.
We all know contact centers largely started out as really a single channel with agents doing similar work at a similar cost. And so, dividing your cost by your volume actually got you really close to being spot on.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever been wrong to use it. The whole industry uses it, and they use it for good reason. But what's changed, I think, and again, I think AI is what's flipped the lights on, but what's really been exposed is that it's the operation that's changed. We're multi-channel. We've got bots. We've got automation. Now we got AI. We've got agents at genuinely different costs. Nothing is financially uniform anymore.
Yeah.
And so what does that really mean? If somebody, how do I explain that? And the answer is that really the complexity of the contact center has exceeded, what that average cost was built to measure.
Right.
And the irony is it's nobody's fault.
No.
There's no fault here. It's simply that the questions the business is now asking have changed faster than the answers.
That's a really good point. I mean, so you say that the average cost is, as you say, it isn't wrong, but it was built for a time where it was contact centers were dealing with maybe one or maybe two channels, but now they're dealing with multiple kind of channels and multiple different types of queries as people's products and service portfolios have expanded and their different types of customers have increased, and so. Yeah, no, it's absolutely. I think it's a really great point. The idea that the complexity of the operation has exceeded what this average cost measure was built to measure in effect. So, no, I think that's really interesting. But then the other thing that I wanted to go on and ask you about is that you said the contact center is the bellwether of the business. And I've always believed this. I've always kind of believed that it's, if you want to know when things kind of go wrong, then you just need to go speak to, or what's happening in your business, you need to go speak to the contact center. And you said, like, the first to know when products, services, or customer experience break down, it's the contact center. But without actual cost data, it can only describe these problems in volume and handle time.
Right.
So I completely agree with the first part of it, what you were saying about that being the bellwether. But it explains to me the value of having that extra fidelity on costs and its impact on the kind of the business.
Yeah. So I think the bellwether part of a contact center, I think everyone can, especially everybody who works in a contact center near it, everybody can see that, right? Everybody knows that whatever's going on, the contact center is going to hear it first. A product breaks, something confuses customers, an experience goes wrong. The phones know, or the contact center knows before anybody's dashboard does.
You're right.
And the thing is that knowing first is only worth something if the business acts on it. And the business doesn't act on volume and handle time. Those are the contact center's language, not the enterprises.
Right.
The business acts on dollars. And so without this cost fidelity, the contact center is the first to know and the last to be heard. And so what that means is the contact center can describe the problem with great precision, but it can't price it.
Right.
And gaining this financial fidelity is really, or gaining this financial precision is what the fidelity changes. And so I actually have a story. If you'd like, I can give you a quick story.
Sure. Go ahead.
It's actually my favorite because it was wonderful to see the reaction in the room with senior leadership. But we had a situation, contact center, sitting down with not only contact center leaders, but the some of the C-suite. And the interesting thing was, we were talking about the contact center and operations, and all the metrics were green, right? Green dashboard, wonderful. The operation ran multiple brands, and the thing was, their customers called a separate number for each brand.
Right.
Okay, and every call that was closed was a first call resolution, and it generally was, customer called, handled, done. But what no metric was able to articulate to the business was seeing what that customer's journey was in total.
Right.
What would happen is a customer actually wanted to do business across more than one brand, and they would have to hang up and call another number. And what ended up happening was they would end up a customer would make 2 calls, and they would sometimes end up talking to the very same agent they just hung up with to finish that. And so leadership was proudly walking around with these great FCR numbers on their brands without realizing how that translated to the customer. And then for the contact center, it was difficult for the contact center to articulate to the business, hey, this is what it means to you guys financially. And it was the cost data that connected the journey. And by showing them, hey, here's what these callbacks are costing the business. And when they could see the actual costs and we measured those for them, they ended up saying, hey, we need to let agents consolidate to a single call for everything, regardless of brand. And when they did that, call volume dropped. It actually dropped by almost 30%.
Wow.
Because they were able to complete what the customer needed in a single call. So instead of multiple calls. And because we had a lot of their data, going back some time, this cost savings and what was happening financially, it wasn't an estimate. We measured the actual before and after, the same way we measured everything else. And so what happened was, engagement times, actually, they didn't, seeing the call volume go down was fabulous. It didn't necessarily shorten their engagement. You're right. A call still was a call. And what was really great was they got more business done almost in the same handle time on fewer calls because they didn't have to re-identify the same person. They didn't have to go through all the things you had to. They could just get it all done. And so it was just such a great outcome. Leadership was thrilled. Contact center leadership was celebrated. It was fantastic. But the bellwether for them was that their metrics were accurate. But without the financials, they were also misleading.
Right.
And so that really was the moment for them. And I think that's what the cost fidelity really provides. It prices what the operations own numbers can't see, but it does it in dollars that the business can act on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually that's the thing that kind of like that moves the needle, as it were, when you get to that kind of senior level, right? Is if you can actually start to talk about, money saved or money kind of potentially kind of extra kind of potentially earned, then that starts to make people kind of pay, sit up and pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also went on to say that this actual cost data that you're encouraging people to go and sort of to gather and calculate and use that to make decisions solves two of the most important contact center problems in the enterprise. I mean, which two problems are you referring to here?
The two biggest problems, I think, are the first one is today it's the ability to defend against. I'm using the word defend. It could be rationalize, right? It could be justify, whichever word you want to put in there. But it's all about protecting or defending yourself against financial scrutiny.
Right.
I think cost accountability is moving more toward contact center leaders. I know it's been in finance forever, but I think it's moving toward the contact center leadership. And so the AI, the ROI on AI or a budget defense or even staffing math, the questions that contact center leaders are being asked are becoming more and more of these precise financial questions.
Mm-hmm.
But the evidence that the contact center leaders are going to have to answer those questions was never built to survive that scrutiny.
Sure.
And of course, that average cost being exceeded by their complexity. And actual cost evidence is the foundation, right, to defending against that or justifying. And the second one is speaking a financial language the enterprise trusts.
Right.
When the contact center presents cost built the way finance builds cost from actual inputs, the CFOs and CIOs, they can recognize it. And I think that's how a cost center earns a seat at the table. It's not by claiming strategic value. It's by proving it with financial evidence the business understands and trusts.
Yeah. And I think that's going to become increasingly important, as you say, because of the impact of AI and some of these operations, but also, I think, and not just because of the use of new tools and applications and the kind of the rise of automation, but also because how that technology is rewriting what work looks like in the contact center. And I think it'll become increasingly important because people will be that whole sort of system requires new skills, new expertise, kind of new patterns of time management and things depending on where you deploy your time and stuff. And so having, if you like, that right. clarity, that granularity on those kind of costs and what it kind of looks like is I think is going to be increasingly important, particularly if, when we look at there are some leaders that often say, well, we can do that with kind of AI. And it's almost like a dumb hammer where they go like, oh, that'll help us kind of reduce costs and we can reduce headcount and everything else. So you're like, we've got to get to the point, as you say, to either justify or defend kind of decisions and reorganization and reconfiguration kind of choices that we're kind of making. And that's not done best with averages. That's best done with kind of detail. And so I think that's kind of fair. And I think that you've painted a really compelling kind of picture. So people might be going, oh yeah, of course. But they go like, so what does that mean? Do I take a finance course? Or where do we start? What's the first thing they should be doing to get to that kind of point?
Yeah, that's really good. I think, a rather straightforward and uncomplicated, uncomplicated way that people can go about this is really before the next big decision comes to you, whether it's an AI business case or, it's a staffing conversation or even budget defense, ask yourself one question, what does this work actually cost?
Mm-hmm.
But at the level I'm making the decision, right? So, the AI business case, AI operates and can operate layers deep into a contact. So taking a average cost per contact is not the answer. It's at the level deep down into that contact where it's actually working. What did the work actually cost before I plan to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to do this, well, what does the work cost me now?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really not the average, but the actual cost. And I'm not trying to pitch anything here, but the uncomfortable discovery, I think, most people are going to have, if they're probably already thinking of it already, is that almost nobody can answer that question.
Right.
But the encouraging message for everybody is that they already have the raw material.
Yes.
Answer the question, and the systems they already have. You have the data.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your ACD, you've got HR, you've got payroll. All the data you need to answer the question exists.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what's never been built is the cost side to match it.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't necessarily, I'm sure you're probably not saying that you don't necessarily have to get to the point where you've got like 100% accuracy or 100% fidelity on this, but you almost have to start down the road. Like you say, you've got all the kind of all the ingredients are there, right? You've got,
right.
What's the cost of the ACD? What's the cost of the IVR? What's the cost of the kind of the bot? What's the cost of the labor cost? What's the cost of all the systems that support all that kind of labor and all these things? So when you break it down, when you break down an interaction, you can start piecing all those things together. It doesn't necessarily need to be 100% accurate, but it'll be a step forward over in terms of kind of, as you say, to fidelity over kind of like what an average cost measure will give you.
Right.
Awesome. So I know you told me a story a bit before about what happened with one contact center. I mean, do you have some examples of some real work that you've done with taking this sort of approach, right? This kind of like actual cost data and what you've been able to do, and to help me understand one, the kind of the challenges that the brands that you worked with have faced and what they've done to overcome it and how they are benefiting and what sort of outcomes are that they're driving to kind of help them almost like earn that seat at the table and to defend and or justify kind of their decision, just so we can bring that whole kind of the whole argument to life.
Mm-hmm. So I could tell you about an engagement, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So there was one engagement, I think, that maybe for our conversation today that really stands out.
Okay.
And that I learned the most was we had a contact center, about 120 agents.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're running multiple channels. They have voice, they got digital, they've got off phone work and, all the work between the contacts. Their leadership, they already knew the costs of, they already knew the cost of their business, but what they didn't know was that they needed to know what was happening, within each of those channels. Where were their shortcomings? What was the cost of a shortcoming? If they wanted to do something or make a fix or a repair, how did that stack up, and what was the financial impact on the business?
Mm-hmm.
The CFO wanted to know. The CFO wanted answers relative to their various brands and products and things that they did, because they wanted to make sure that they were protecting margin and not just plastering a generalized average across everything without knowing if they were underwater.
Sure.
And so they wanted to, the contact center was really eager to want to try to gain that kind of precision to really know what was going on. And what they realized was, by working with us was, they identified that, hey, we really are more complicated, and what's happening is really more nuanced than what our averages can tell them. And what we ended up doing was we built their actual costs. We started from the ground up. We started with every activity. We started with every contact, every agent, every resource, and at its actual cost and its actual recorded time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty awesome. The effect was really almost immediate because the money now hadn't, I'm going to use the word that money now had an address.
Right.
They could point exactly, the spending. It turned out that the spend wasn't where the average implied it was. Even on their most, everybody knows what their most heavily trafficked queue is, but even the amount of money that they thought was there wasn't really there. It wasn't the same.
Right.
And what it turned out was that, some of the work they thought was cheap turned out not to be. There was capacity they were paying for that wasn't reaching customers.
Right.
And nobody could see that, because that single average had folded everything that was going on, into that one number. And they couldn't unravel that or peel the layers back to really see where it was. And so what happened with them was over about 12 months, they worked through things, and it was using the evidence that they were able to make the decisions and make changes. And what they did was they pulled more than $7 million out of operational costs, and they attributed about 3 million of that to being able to see exactly where the money was.
Okay.
But I want to be deliberate. The way I'm saying that, we didn't save them the money, right? I mean, and again, we helped them with 3 million out of that 7 million. What happened was we showed them what was true.
Right.
They were able to make the decisions now because they had that financial clarity.
Right.
And so I think that was probably the biggest piece for them.
So tell me, did the people that you were working with, did they have an idea or an inkling that what you were able to help them understand, but they didn't have the data to prove it? Or was the findings that you came up with, was it also a surprise to them as well? Because you know how sometimes people have got this intuitive understanding. They're like, oh, right. I think it's like this, but I don't know how to prove that because our numbers don't tell that story. And people are always a bit like, what does the data tell? We led by the data. And you're like going, well, I'm not so sure. And then you've been able to give them a different view and they're going, that's what I felt was going on, but I didn't know how to prove it.
I think what it did more than anything was, I think to your point, it supported some of their intuition.
Right.
And it also provided clarity on some things that did turn out to be genuine surprises. I remember there were, as you look at this kind of insight and you're able to see it down to the, to the individual agent's performance, they were, they pointed that, said, aha, I always knew that person was really awesome.
Right.
And then there were others that they say, gosh, I thought this person here was rather a middling performer or whatever, but it turned out they're really strong, they're really dedicated, and they're really working hard with the customers.
Right.
In my words, it took all of the activity metrics that they all knew so well, their quality, their CSAT, all those kinds of metrics, and having that financial answer underneath it really strengthened or solidified the meaning of that. It's one thing to say that you've got a quality metric or performance metric that looks really great, but if you find out that you're only getting 30 cents on the dollar for that, well, but I've got another person who's got quality who's 70 cents on the dollar. Oh my gosh, that's what a big difference.
Sure.
So I think that's what it did, was it just helped to shine a light, but it helped them to find out too, well, where should we be focusing? How can we be helping?
Nice.
How can we optimize? And I can show the business the financial outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's really what led them to that savings. It was really interesting. That money that they saved, nobody was trying to hide it. The contact center wasn't trying to hide the money. You couldn't see it because the average, again, was folding it all in. And so it really helped them to identify what was really there. And it just turned out to be a fabulous story. I mean, we worked with them for 6 years.
Wow.
And after that initial engagement, it was just, it's been fabulous.
I think the idea that you were part of a project that was able to help save or pull $7 million in cost savings out of a 120 seat operation, of which you're able to facilitate. You're directly involved in facilitating kind of 3 million of those costs. I mean, like 7 million out of a 120 seat kind of like contact center. That's a big deal. That's kind of a big chunk of cost, sort of thing.
It was, and I won't claim to know where the other 4 came from. I mean, that was their number that they, that was the number that they told me, and they told me what, the amount of savings that we'd identified for them and what they attributed to us. And so that's why I want to be very clear to say that we didn't do 7 million. We helped them to identify 3.
Yeah, no, that's kind of fair. But I do think it's like that taking the approach, as you say, if you fold in that whole idea that this is not a new thing, but the contact center has over recent years come under increasing scrutiny because it's a big cost base, right? And it's been kind of heavy with kind of like employees, and it always is become an increasingly under kind of like scrutiny. And but then as enterprises and brands have realized that we need to invest in that, it's a big part of our kind of broader kind of customer experience. Then people are looking for, well, if I'm putting more money in, I want to understand what I'm getting out. And then what you're highlighting is that the average measures that we've used don't quite cut it when you're thinking about having those kind of conversations. And so taking this actual cost approach and working from the ground up is a really interesting kind of like way of getting them closer to having those conversations, or at least getting them involved in having those conversations and earning that seat at the table. So I think that's fascinating. And I applaud kind of the approach that you're taking and the success that you've kind of had. And I would encourage people to go and check out the work that you do at WiserOwl and just really think about some of this sort of stuff and how they can do that. But that's sort of kind of what I wanted to do, is almost to help you shine a light on that, because I think it was really interesting. But before we kind of go into some quick fire questions, anything else that you'd like to add before I wrap up? Anything we've missed out?
I want to just full disclosure. I think it's important that just to quickly explain that this look from the outside, this might look like a data exercise. It isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Getting to a single activity cost you can actually trust. On our side, it's over 700 operations, and it takes place in a non-negotiable order. That's before any cost is total, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to say is that getting to these answers is a construction. It's really not a spreadsheet. And, the report on top, right, is the easy half, showing a total number or whatever. It's the unit underneath. That's the half that's really never existed before. So I think I don't want to make it sound like everybody can just go dash off and grab their data and start building. It's a bit more complicated than that.
That's fair enough. It comes with a health warning.
Yeah, exactly. But it's good for you if you can do it.
Indeed. Thank you for that. But finally, just before we wrap up, a few quick fire questions before we finish.
Yeah.
So the first one I want to ask is, I always ask people to boil things down, because we talked about a bunch of things, and I was like, well, let's figure out what's your best advice. And the way I do this on the podcast right now is to ask my guest to complete this sentence. And the sentence is this: if you want to improve your customer experience, Robert says, do this. Complete that sentence.
Find out what your work actually costs at the level you make decisions, and not as an average. Every improvement you want to make for customers or for your people, it eventually needs a number that holds up. And once you can see where the money actually goes, the case for the right changes makes itself.
Awesome. Love that. So my next question, and well, it's a punk one, because it's the Punk CX podcast. So tell me, what company or brand do you think takes a more punk approach to customer experience, and why?
It's funny when we talk punk, or I think punk, I always think you're in the States back of Wendy O. Williams and the Plasmatics and blowing up cars on stage. But, and actually that's really good. I just said that because I'm not much of a shopper. And so my answer's sitting in my driveway. I have a Toyota that's 15 years old, and I love that car.
Right.
And it's really funny and the reason I think it's punk is because the car industry, we all know, it's all excitement, new models, bling, features, blah, 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 loud exhaust or whatever. And I think Toyota decided the punk move was to be boring. I mean, build a car that just never breaks.
100%.
I mean, it's 15 years old, but you know what? It still feels new to me.
Right.
And I think if any Toyota were to fail before 100,000 miles, they'd probably call it a failure.
Yeah.
And so everybody jokes that, I don't know that everybody, but I hear that Toyotas are boring or whatever, but I think daring to be boring in an industry that sells excitement, that's pretty punk.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the thing is, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I love the idea that Toyota, as you say, maybe may not create the most kind of exciting cars, but they probably create the most reliable cars. And reliable for many people is you could take best and reliable and kind of swap them around, because they're like going, well, if I need it to get myself back and forward, I need to kind of rely on it, then it just needs to work. And I think they've done that. They've been incredibly successful at that. And they're one of the biggest car companies in the world, and they've never really had any kind of problems like many other kind of car companies kind of have had. They just kind of keep going. And I think it's a great example. And I love that. It's sort of like, make something that's just boring and reliable, but actually, when you compare that to the broader market, where everybody's gone zig, they've gone, we're just zagging, and we've always zagged, and that's just our thing.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I don't ever want to get rid of it. I just love that guy. I just love it. So
excellent. I love that one. So, final question before we wrap up: the world is, we had a bit of a loving, kind of like when we kind of recorded this. We just come to the end of a loving, which was in the World Cup, which was in the US and Canada and Mexico. And that brought a whole bunch of people together, but it was a bit of almost like a brief interlude, because the world feels like a bit of a weird place right now. There's lots of kind of weird stuff kind of going on. And so, let's end on a positive note. Robert, tell me a good news story. Tell me what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week.
Well, okay. Well, for me and WiserOwl personally, I think what's great is this week we signed a partnership that takes WiserOwl's work into Asia Pacific. We did that with an operation named CXTT, a gentleman named Michael Clark, and his consultancy in Australia.
Fantastic.
And I think what makes it this week's good news is how it happened.
Okay.
I think Michael found the argument on his own, and he reached out, and we worked it out. And I think that, when an idea starts traveling that far, and I'm just so thrilled and honored that it made it to you as well. I mean, really, this is the best signal there is.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to help, and it's always been one of my objectives through this kind of podcast and also the writing, but definitely through the podcast. And it's like more than 15 years old, this podcast by now. It's had various names across the years. Well, two names. One was a Rare Business podcast, and one was, the last 7 years or so has been called the Punk CX podcast. And the objective was always to try and shine a light on stories and things that I think can make a difference in this kind of service and experience sort of like space. And whether that's ideas, whether it's new technologies, whether it's actually kind of brand practices, whether it's kind of like organizational things, whether it's leadership things, whatever it might be, it's a way of just shining kind of lights on it. And then by shining a light on it, hopefully, like a plant, you give it some light, and then hopefully it kind of grows and it gives it a chance to spread. And so, Robert, I just want to say thank you for spending the time with me today, kind of like sharing some thoughts about where the kind of the some of the problems lie in the sort of cost measurement and analysis in the contact center space, or more broadly in the experience space, I guess. That's been super interesting and super cool. And so just thank you so much. That's been great.
Cheers, and thank you so much, Adrian, for the opportunity to chat and to share the story.
Perfect.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.